Thank you, Aliu, for this introduction. And thank you all for joining us for this third enrichment event, which, as Aliu explained, is part of the activities that the Fulbright Support Project is supposed to provide. And we think it's very important to have this kind of conversation around topic of interest for Fulbrighters, but also give Fulbrighters the opportunity to talk about their research, but also get feedback from their colleagues. This is the third enrichment event, as Aliu mentioned, and we will be having other enrichment events on various topics, and hopefully we will be talking about for our next sessions, violent extremism and security matters in West Africa. And thank you, Zale and Fode and all those guest speakers, but also all Fulbrighters who volunteers to participate in this seminar, which we think will be another opportunity for us to learn more about your research, but also learn about something that may advance us in our different research projects. So, Aliu, I will give back the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bodian. I'm just receiving an email from Fode.
Aliu?
Yes, he's logging in a minute. So,
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying I just received an email from Fode, so he's going to be joining us. But Conrad, if you don't mind, maybe you can get started because Fode was supposed to go first before you. So since we don't know how long he will take to actually log in, is it okay if we get you started first?
I guess, yeah, let me get my stuff up.
Okay.
Am I able to share a screen now? Okay. Oh, can you see my stuff?
Yes, I can see it very well.
Excellent, very good.
Okay. So okay. So Conrad, just as a reminder, you have 15 minutes for your presentation. So yeah, when you reach the 10 minutes mark, I'll just let you know that you did reach the 10 minutes. So just as a reminder, if that's
well, thank you, Aliun. Thank you everyone for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you some thoughts I've put together since I've been spent my time. The time in Ghana, I was a Fulbright scholar in Ghana. I'm actually back in the United States now and doing my teaching and research, but I thought this would be helpful to present some of the ideas or thoughts that I had on these kind of topics here at the end and starting on to the new time. So, thank you for the opportunity to present here and to visit with you all briefly at other times. So my topic today is on economic institutions, freedom and corruption. Obviously, these are some of the things that you may see the practical effects of if you're living in Africa. I've had 2 Fulbright awards at this point, one in Ethiopia, one in Ghana. And both these countries suffer a lot from issues of weak economic institutions, corruption, and some associated issues there. So I'm just going to kind of briefly through some of the basic ideas. There's a kind of a contrasting model of sorts. One is one of natural liberty proposed by Adam Smith, individual pursuit of self-interest in markets, not selfishness, free trade, and limited government involvement, versus one that advocates more of a socialism or communistic approach, collective government ownership, control resources, central planning that was put forth by Karl Marx. And, you guys aren't economists, I know, so I won't really go into much of the economic stuff. Of course, I am an economist. And so economic freedom index, I'm just going to bring this up: size of government, legal structure and strength of that, access to sound money, freedom to trade internationally, regulation of private labor and business are all really important areas of economic freedom. So if we look at the world, this is 2021, we can look at the most free countries over here, North America, Australia, some countries in Europe primarily. You see some green at different places here, orange. And then we get to Africa, you really see orange and red. And so you say, well, okay, well, they're not really super free. What does that really mean? And these dark areas are areas where there's no data for the country. So just because there's no data for that country there in the middle there. So over here, we're going to have, so okay, so we looked at economic freedom. I picked some countries in the area. Ghana, where of course I was posted, is over here. The other one I was posted, Ethiopia. So economic freedom here on the scale, Ghana is pretty good for that in terms of general economic freedom. Okay, so how does it really impact prosperity and development? I'm just going to go through a few things. So the least free, how much income you have, basically, obviously over 50,000 for the most free, least free, just over 5,000. Big deal in terms of economic opportunity. For the poorest 10%, how much the poorest 10% have? And the most free, just a little less than 14,000 here, we're looking at $1,000, okay, income. That's a lot, that's a big difference. Extreme poverty, it's $1.90 a day. The least free have substantial portion of their population that have a lot of people that live in that status of their population. Life expectancy at birth, the freest quartile is relatively high, the least free much lower, and so you see the impacts across here. And so that's just an overview of how economic freedom impacts people's outcomes and lifestyles, and that's kind of more of an overview of what I wanted to kind of cover. Now, I'm going to pivot more closely to something I'm actually focusing more on my own stuff, is on corruption. And corruption can take many forms. And so while corruption has distinct nuances in each country, the misappropriation of public assets, self-dealing, bribery, and other forms of corruption are recurring challenges that impact every country and individuals around the world. Okay, and that's true. We have corruption in the United States. We could cite examples. But the everyday kind of corruption that takes place in countries like Ghana or Ethiopia really impact lives, either interactions with police officers, whether and I'll focus specific on agricultural markets, which I'm primarily interested in as an agricultural economist. We'll pivot to that, but this probably affects how you conduct your life in education. For example, in education, a lot of times if people are given money or to forward intervention, those supplies may not make it to the intended recipients, and that is a form of corruption. If you're looking at healthcare, the many anecdotal stories I have here in Ghana where the patients have to buy their own drugs to treat themselves, and when the nurses administer those drugs, they actually substitute some cheaper drug or no drug at all, and then sell the drug that was purchased externally. So these are just some anecdotal stories. So it affects healthcare, affects health outcomes, it affects education. So this is just, I'm going to be focusing on agriculture, but obviously corruption is affecting many different aspects of society. And so we're looking at bribery, though, if we want specifically said, in the past 12 months, 22% of public service users have paid a bribe. So they're paying a bribe. People who are younger tend to pay more bribes. Men pay more, 57% of bribe payers are male. And urban residents are more likely to have bribed. Public service users who live in cities tend to be slightly more likely than rural residents to have paid a bribe. So the urban versus rural. And the thing that's particularly bad, the poorest Africans are hardest hit by bribery. They're twice as likely as the most affluent in the region to have paid a bribe in the last 12 months. So the poorest are doing, and if you drive through Ghana, you'll be stopped relatively regularly, and your driver or who you're with may be asked, inspected for papers. In many cases, they'll be expected to put a small amount of money with their driver's license when it's checked, not to be harassed and to get out of that. So it's pretty commonplace. This bribery, practical effects of corruption. Look, here's some road work here that hasn't been done properly. Obviously driving around Africa can be interesting too. So I'm going to focus on how does corruption impact agricultural production and marketing, and I'm going to give you some examples of how it impacts agricultural production and marketing. And first of all, the assumption we have, and when most people do interventions or think about trade, and think about doing an intervention, we assume that when we buy something, it actually is what we intend to be. I'm going to look in particular at fertilizer markets. If you buy a fertilizer here in the United States, you can believe pretty strongly that it's going to be actually as marked on the fertilizer bag. So you know what it is in that bag, and you know how it's going to operate. Is that true in Africa, though? Okay, so 40% of the fertilizer was adulterated. Some studies in India, sometimes with toxic substances. So they put heavy metals or something else in the fertilizer instead of actual fertilizer. So 40% in India. A friend of mine was doing some research, and I was still planning to hopefully collaborate with him on the research. And he found that 30% of fertilizer was adulterated in Kenya from corn growing regions. So 30%. So you can ask yourself this question: how much adulteration is going on in your country for this stuff? How much of the funds you're trying to use for a purpose is being misappropriated? And I just bring up a point in there is that I found out during my trip to Ghana that a substantial portion of the funds, after my project was over, the profits that were generated from the study that should have been used had been misappropriated or stolen by one of our vendors. So obviously, and there's really no legal recourse to get that money back, unfortunately, evidently. Okay, so it affects interventions. So let's look at just a little study here. Now, so I said, okay, so agricultural fertilizer is bad. Maybe we look at seed. So I assume seed is not functioning so well. So I just had somebody go in, a farmer go in and buy some seeds, and then I had them tested to see how they worked. Okay, and so there were, in there we had watermelon, hot pepper, amaranth, sweet pepper, onion, hot pepper, melon, okra, and cucumber. Okay, as you can see, for the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these, and this was during the prime vegetable growing season. They should have been seeds that were available. There's 0% germination for this. The next 3, they had relatively mediocre germination rates, with cucumber being the best. This was done at the Sari Research Institute in Tamale, which is probably the best institute in that region for looking at these kind of issues. So I had tested there. Pretty poor performance, I'd say, for the seed market. So you say, what does it really matter if that happens? Okay, so this is an area, we're looking at the northern Ghana. Where does it really matter? And so I'm just going to bring up a thing of practical implications. This is cereal yields from 1961 to 2020, roughly a 40-year period. Okay, and here in the United States, here you go, 1961, the yields for say the United States was here. You can see the little bar here, and really about 4 tons per hectare. Now in that time frame, which obviously the time Africa was down here about 1. Okay, so at the time the U.S. was 4 times larger than Africa. Okay, in that time frame the United States has doubled. Okay, Belgium has 2, other countries. India, look at China. China is more than double. Look how China's gone up. They've tripled their yields. Okay, go over here to Africa. Here's Africa over here, roughly flat, roughly a 3% increase over this time frame. That's the practical implications of having bad seeds and bad fertilizer in the marketplace. Okay, it's having bad performance in agriculture. And so what does economics tell us about corruption? Causes: regulation, the legal system, lack of democracy, natural resource dependence as causes. It affects, reduces trust, misallocates resources, lots of uncertainty. Property rights deteriorate, people steal land. I've heard of stories of people stealing land and people changing the markers. Reduced economic development, clearly. How do we fight corruption? You got to change the incentives, more economic freedom, more rule of law, higher wages, transparency. There's something called blockchain where you can actually verify who owns the property. And then a lot of times you do something called e-governance, where instead of interacting with public servants, you can do all your work online through e-governance. And Kenya has done a really good job of trying to do that, I think, recently. Ghana is a bit further away on that, but basically you can get all your services, your driver's license, everything else renewed, online. So that's how we fight corruption. So I think I'm keeping right at the time. Here's some suggested readings. And before I get into that, I just say, I'd like you to think about, if you're looking for policy, how are you going to improve the situations you're working in? Because this is kind of pervasive. If you look at even the institution provision of books, or all kinds of different aspects of education, the medicine to agriculture are being affected by corruption. How do you strengthen the systems so that it's less likely, it's easier for the people involved in those systems to follow the right rules that most of them really want to follow? There's some anecdotal stories and where I'm from, where I saw, around Christmas time, the police would stop everybody in checkpoints. A lot of times they even had, fake people. They heard a story about how the police would have they would fakely certify that people, they would give you, they pull you over for not having a sticker on your car. They give you insurance, but all that was fake. So they just basically took a massive bribe from motorists and didn't even provide the right paperwork. And so the issues of corruption practically in terms of how the system works I think are pervasive in many cases. And how do you improve that system to improve and to change outcomes? And that's something I've spent some time thinking about and working about. So here's some additional readings if you're interested in that about corruption. I think you'll find them relatively easy reads. They're not too technical in terms of how to think about them and look at things. And then I want to thank you. And here's my email if you're interested. I'm exactly 15 minutes, I believe, Ali. And so if you, I don't think we really have time for questions, but.
You're looking good. You're looking really good, Conrad. No, the questions will come after.
Okay, very good. So I'm all good. Thank you. And just say to everybody, thank you for the opportunity to present here today. Hopefully my presentation was useful, and let me know if I can help with your work or something's related. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Conrad. That was a great presentation. And I think Fode has joined us. Fode?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you well. I can see you well too. Okay. Loud and clear. Yes. So Fode, sorry about that. I realized that I sent you the wrong time. I got confused with the different times because you told me you were Eastern Standard Time, right?
Yes.
So that was 1 hour earlier, I think. So sorry about the confusion. And thank you for it.
I'm here now. Yes. Thank you.
You can go ahead whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here to share my Fulbright research with you. I must confess, I don't have a very neat put together PowerPoint as Conrad has done. I'll be speaking mostly from my notes and from my project notes and so forth. But I'll be very happy to clarify any points that are unclear following my presentation and during question time. So the title of my talk today is Why Sierra Leone's International Agreement Should Matter to Us All. It's drawn from my Fulbright research project in Sierra Leone Between 2019, that was briefly interrupted by the onset of the COVID pandemic, and then resumed sometime in 2021. And then I just recently returned from the field in the fall of 2022. The overall title of my project in Sierra Leone was The Motivations, Constraints, and Politics of Acceding to International Agreements. And that's primarily in reference with regard to Sierra Leone's international agreement. My research question is, because I'm still working on the project, I'm now in a different phase of the project, having returned here to my institution. My research question is, or was, why does Sierra Leone accede to some international agreements and not others? And one of the main reasons, or one of the main motivations for this research question goes back to a couple of incidents, one of which I can just briefly mention here. In about 2014, 2015, thereabout, the president of Sierra Leone, at the time, Ernest Koroma, fired his vice president, Sam Sumana. He removed him from office, and there was a whole constitutional crisis, constitutional debate by those who supported the action and those who opposed the action, saying the president did not have the constitutional powers to do that. Eventually, to cut a long story short, the matter ended up in the ECOWAS court, the Economic Community of West African State Court in Nigeria, where the court assumed authority over the matter and said it had jurisdiction over the matter, and proceeded to rule against the president that he did not have the power to fire his vice president. The president insisted that he had the power, and the court ruled that the vice president should be paid any number of damages, Sam Sumana. And that process dragged on back and forth for several years. And then fast forward to another incident in which the government of Sierra Leone was again dragged to the ECOWAS court in Abuja, Nigeria. And this time it was over a matter regarding a business person, a foreign business person resident in the country in the name of Mohammed Wanza, who was said to have been owed back pay from the sale for the supply of a gunboat, a military boat, to the Sierra Leone Navy. The boat was considered defective, and a previous government had held on to its payment and refused to pay. And the new government that came in, the subsequent government of Ernest Koroma, who had fired his vice president, proceeded to work with Mohammed Wanza and pay him all the money that he was owed for the defective boat. So two scenarios, two cases in that kind of public debate. And in the first instance, in the first instance of the firing of the vice president, the government said that ECOWAS did not have jurisdiction, that there was no binding agreement that will subject them to the agreement of the court, the ruling of the court. In the other instance regarding Mohammed Wanza, the government proceeded to quickly pay the money. And when the information minister, who was a spokesperson for the government, was asked, well, why the double play? Why abide by the ECOWAS court in one instance and not in the other instance? And he basically said the ECOWAS agreement was legal in Sierra Leone, and if they hadn't paid Mohammed Wanza his money, they would have been dragged even beyond the ECOWAS court to maybe some world court. So that raised a whole bunch of questions about how countries comply with international agreements. But that's not the only motivation for this research. There are several more that I can draw upon, but let me move forward. So then, based upon that, I chose to study again the way countries such as Sierra Leone accede to and do not accede to some international agreement. The process of acceding to an international agreement itself involves 3 steps. In international relations, under international law, mostly what happens typically is a government that is mandated to do so goes to an international setting where there's an agreement on offer that is floated by both parties after extensive negotiations. And the process of acceding to an agreement involves signing it by the relevant parties, the representatives of the relevant parties, the government, signing it. And upon signing it, the next phase in acceding to an agreement is ratifying it, but that has to be done by the parliament of the signatory country. And then the third and final phase is to domesticate it, and each grows kind of in complexity. Signing it is kind of the easier part. Ratifying it is usually, in the parliament takes a lot of debate. And domesticating it, to domesticate an agreement means to bring the country's laws to correlate with the international agreements, basically, to be consistent with the international agreement. It means revisiting the country's laws, the country's constitution even, and removing relevant clauses that will make it consistent with the international agreement that has just been signed. So again, different parties, presidents sign, or foreign ministers, and then it's ratified by parliaments, and then the Justice Ministry working in concert with the relevant ministries or departments or agencies in the government work to domesticate the agreement and bring it in concert with domestic laws. For my research itself, I was primarily situated in the Foreign Ministry of Sierra Leone in a place called Tower Hill. And then I also, my Fulbright project I was doing both research and teaching. So I also taught at the University of Sierra Leone during that time. I taught research methods at the University of Sierra Leone. So I worked with individuals at the Foreign Ministry primarily. And I won't bore you with all of the empirical details of the research that I did, of my research process, but partly some of the things that I did was I interviewed every relevant member of the Foreign Ministry who worked in the sections dealing with international agreements. I also went to the Parliament building, which wasn't very far. It's situated just a couple of steps from the Foreign Ministry, and talked with officials in Parliament, parliamentarians, and so forth. I also interviewed individuals in the Justice Department, and I also talked with members of civil society. My colleagues at the university were very helpful as well in giving me their opinion when time permitted. And I also talked to various random individuals. But primarily, some of the main sources of my data came from the very helpful individuals at the Foreign Ministry, who very happily shared with me some of their archives. I went into the archives. It wasn't very well organized. Again, the typical, African problem because of a lack of funding. I could also even mention that in some parts, the records of some agreements were much more neatly organized. When we actually inquired, were much more neatly available here at the embassy in Washington, D.C., and at the UN in New York than in Sierra Leone itself. But that's for another day. Let me move on to the next aspect of my presentation. So the next thing that I did following that data was to, again, look at the actual record of the various international agreements that Sierra Leone has signed. And for that, I concentrated on multilateral agreements because there are bilateral agreements and then multilateral agreements. My research scope kind of over time was from Sierra Leone's independence, bringing it forward to that most recent year when I was, at the Foreign Ministry. And in total, well, let me put it this way: there are hundreds of bilateral agreements and various kinds of agreements, hundreds of them. It will have been nearly impossible to sit through all of them in the time that I, had. So I concentrated on the multilateral agreement, and also at some point began to kind of, nitpick and look for some of the major international agreements that have been floated internationally, such as, the Paris Agreement, the Climate Change Agreement, and so forth, as key areas to focus on for my research. I'm still in the process of analyzing the data, and the empirical process involves me trying to understand, first of all, I've categorized the overall, the multilateral agreements into the ones that were signed, that had been signed, and then the ones that were not signed, the ones that the government of Sierra Leone did not sign. And then next, for the ones that were signed, there are also some that are in various stages of the ratification process, or the various stages of the process. So some agreements are typically signed, brought back to Sierra Leone, and then quickly go through ratification in Parliament, and then subsequently domesticated. Some agreements are brought in and then pretty much die. They are not taken to Parliament for ratification and so forth. So there's a great deal of variation in terms of where the various agreements are. And it took a lot of finding and so a lot of going back and forth and a lot of work in trying to put them together in terms of where exactly they were in the pipeline. So back to the research question, why does Sierra Leone accede to some international agreements and not others? First, let me make this caveat that what I'm presenting now as some preliminary findings, because my research process is still going on. I will need to establish relationships between some explanatory variables that I've drawn upon and the status of the agreements, some agreements. I will need to do some regression analysis and so forth to kind of explore or tease out these relationships much further, to test out, the strength and the direction and so forth of some of these relationships. And I also realized, and this is kind of a little beyond what the typical textbook explanations of international agreements, point out. If you look at most textbooks that discuss international agreements, the process is typically subsumed to be pretty much almost one, and it's not. It's not. There's a whole politics of signing international agreements that I found from studying the Sierra Leone case. There's a whole politics of ratifying them, and there's a whole politics of domesticating them. Let me, for example, dwell on the politics of signing some agreements, for example. So agreements are typically signed by a president or a foreign minister, or sometimes I also found some ministers in the relevant areas will go to an international conference and then are authorized, as the foreign ministry told me, to sign an agreement on behalf of the government of Sierra Leone. The more important the agreement is, the more likely it is to be one that was signed by the president. And typically, those that are signed by the president typically get ratified and domesticated much more quickly, which might seem pretty obvious, right? You might say, well, the most important ones get signed by the president. But I'll quickly give you an example of one agreement that I'll get to very shortly that wasn't quite the case, which raises up a whole bunch of different kinds of questions. And then the next step in the process is ratifying an agreement. And that requires a whole lot of debate in Parliament. It begins with the Parliamentary Foreign Relations Committee, where the agreement is first floated, the signed agreement, and it's debated extensively by various members of Parliament before it is ultimately tabled in Parliament for a vote to be taken on before it's kind of ratified. And once it's done, the next stage is the Justice Department being authorized to look into the Constitution and see ways in which various clauses either contradicted or are consistent with the agreement, and to try to domesticate it and place it on the laws or on the books for Sierra Leone. So a whole different considerations in that regard, a whole sort of political considerations that go into that. So let me quickly draw up on one agreement that was signed and one that was not signed. First, for one that has not, well, it was signed but has not been ratified and has not gone through the process. So in 2016, President Nkrumah signed an agreement regarding, it was a gender law, an international gender agreement that was supposed to have taken or made illegal the process of female genital mutilation, so a practice that is quite common in a lot of African countries. So he signed the agreement, came home, and when once civil society activists in various quarters of Sierra Leone realized that the agreement was signed, they raised hell about it not being ratified. They said it was inconsistent with the cultural practices in Sierra Leone, that whatever they choose to do that's considered female genital mutilation is indeed a cultural practice in Sierra Leone that should be honored and respected by others. The president backed off moving further with that agreement, it was also heading into an election year heading into 2018, and the former administration typically backed off that agreement. Fast forward to another agreement that had been signed by the president. It included acceding to some aspect of nuclear agreement. And you typically wouldn't consider Sierra Leone to be a nuclear, not even close, country with nuclear energy, or even with the potential to have one in the next, never say never. Nevertheless, the agreement was signed, brought home and ratified, and very quickly domesticated. So I then asked, various individuals at the foreign ministries in my search for explanations as to what explains some of these variations. And one, again, some of these answers or findings are preliminary. One, they did mention that in some instances, when an agreement is brought to the foreign ministry, it usually involves a matter of technical expertise and know-how. If they have the technical expertise, or if a foreign government provides some assistance that will help them navigate the technical details of that agreement, then it's much more quickly handled. I found that very surprising for a number of reasons. So it in fact means that what most scholars have previously assumed as to why some agreements are acceded to or not acceded to could be incorrect in the light of this particular finding. That agreements, whether agreements are signed or not, could have more to deal with the technical know-how and capability of the relevant parties who work on that agreement to try to ratify it and domesticate it, than to some of the political motivations that some other scholars typically point to.
Dr. Bati?
So, yes.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but it would be great if you could just wrap up in the next few minutes, because
okay, well, let me summarize that. Yes. Okay, yeah. Please. Yes. So so that is one of the findings I'll be exploring much more deeply in any number of publications that I'll be putting out there. But I'm very grateful for the research process. I learned a lot from working with officials at the foreign ministry. I also benefited greatly from the Fulbright folks such as Kate and others here in New York or in DC, who were always ready research-wise to support any number of proposals that I had. I'll be very glad to take questions or to clarify additional details when we get to that. Thank you very much again, Aliyu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bati, for this awesome presentation, just like the first one. So without any further ado, I'll leave the floor to our guest speakers of today, Dr. Bodian and Dr. Zale. Just whenever you're ready for your feedback, and then we'll move on to the questions and before we wrap up. Dr. Zale, Dr. Bodian.
Yes, okay. I think we can leave the floor to Zale because he's going to make a quick presentation on the social policies. Okay. And then I will give a broad comment.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Dr. Zale?
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
here, sir.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor. Yes, I'll be just talking about dealing with social protection in Africa in general, but mainly, with focus in Senegal, because when when President Abdoulaye Wade, came to power in 2000, when President Abdou Diouf left, President Abdou Diouf, he was a socialist, and President Abdoulaye Wade a liberal, but he did, his best to implement policies, that would not leave aside, the needy, and he was concerned about that project, and that's why he ended up having what we call Plan Sésame. It is for the elderly. taking care of the elderly. And also he had a concern for kindergarten programs, which is called Case Tout Petit. So you can take your kids, to school, to kindergarten without paying. Okay, it's going to be public service. And also he had also what we call Plan Sésame. Plan Sésame, yeah. I talked about the Plan Sésame. So those were the the main focus. And when President Macky Sall came in 2012, he kind of broadened it and included 6-section coverage, full section, hospitalization and surgery. And also he had a program also for hemodialysis. For anyone who suffers hemodialysis, you can have full coverage at hospital. And yes. And what is interesting to mention in Senegal is that, our social protection is very fragmented. We have a social security service, Caisse de Sécurité Sociale. We have IPRES, which is concerned about pensions. And also, we have also, what we call CMU. CMU, it is the National Agency for Health Coverage. So CMU, mainly manages everything related to C-section, hemodialysis, and also universal health coverage, because this is the way it's layered. We have on a medical level, we have it's like a pyramid. So on top you have the hospitals, regional hospitals or national hospitals, and right after you have this health centers, and then on the bottom you have what we call outposts, health outposts, and we have thousands of health outposts in Senegal. So you take a bunch of health outposts that will be just connected to what we call, for example, to the health center, and then after. And then after that, you have the health outposts, and then you have the hospitals. So that's the way it is designed. That's the way it's laid. So what is interesting also to mention is the fact that Senegal is subsidizing those programs. We have like, for example, when it comes to funding health coverage, we have like for example, for all the civil servants, they have access to what they call imputation budgétaire, and for the private sector we have what we call the prise en charge, and that prise en charge, it's like mostly, for example, it's co-payment. Okay, for civil servants you pay 1/5. Okay. And then for the prise en charge, within the private sectors, it depends on, the level of coverage. Some they have 80% of coverage, some has like, 60%, some 50%, depending on the might of your company. And now, for those, for example, who don't have access, to the private sector or the civil, the public sector, who are not civil servants, they can rely on what we call the mutuelle. So the mutuelles, we have a bunch of them here in Senegal, scattered around the country, more than 650 something. Okay, so anyone who don't have access to the imputation budgétaire and prise en charge médicale, within the private sector, you can rely on the mutuelles. So the mutuelles, this is how it is designed. You have to pay 70,000, but the state subsidies for 50%, and now for anyone who is enrolled in the mutuelle, you can pay 2,500. So Interesting also to mention, a lot of politicians, they're using the mutuals, to enroll or to quote, voters. Like, for example, I'm a politician somewhere, I can say, okay, I'll be paying for, like, let's say 200, people to have them being enrolled in the, within the mutuals. So because it's on a community level, it's community-based programs. So that's the point with the mutual. And CME also is facing a lot of problem because, and also the Plan Sésame, because it's a system of co-payment. Whenever you go, on a community-based level, you can have access to those papers, and then from that papers, you can access to the health outposts, or to the health centers, or to the hospital, with, so that way you can be subsidized. But what is problematic is the fact that sometimes the state is forgetting, or not, I don't know, I would call it forget, or just is done on purpose. They're not paying back the hospitals. So, and some people might be going to some places or hospitals, and they will be saying, oh, we're sorry, we cannot take your coverage because, we have like millions or billions, not being paid by the states. So that is very problematic. And for a country, for example, like Ghana, because we have all of this has to, to deal with the constitution itself, constitutional approach, and also a historical background, and last but not least, the question of governance, okay, good governance. And it has underpinnings, or it has a direct connection to the question of homogeneity, because the more the state is, a country is homogeneous, it's the more that country, could have, good social programs. And that's why the Scandinavian model is a good example, okay? I think Dr. Conrad talked about it, like in the state, the fact that people don't have like sometimes access to healthcare, yeah, because the homogeneity in the states, is, still critical. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I don't want to take the floor for a long time. I don't know whether I've been over 10 minutes. Yeah, so maybe I'll leave room, for more discussion and questions. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Dr. Deliverance, and that sounds good. Maybe in the question Q&A session, you'll have maybe more time to come back to it. And Dr. Podian, whenever you're ready, feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alioune, and I want to thank all the speakers, Fode, Conrad, for your. Okay, I'm gonna put my video. I don't know if you can see me. Kind of using. I'm having some trouble with my laptop, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and I think it's kind of eye-opening, and I want to jump on a couple of issues that came over during your presentation, and I think maybe one of the main point is the capacity of the state as the main actor in providing sound policies, but also policies that can push forward the state agenda in foreign policy, but also in good governance, but also in the provision of social services. So one of the reasons why we decided to put together this enrichment event, this panel, is to kind of pin down the issue of foreign of kind of public policy in Africa, because as you know, since independence, many critics vis-a-vis Africa mention the issue of governance, but also how the state is capable or not in providing basic services, including health, education, but also other policies that can help the state to position itself as an actor internationally, but also draw all these advantages that foreign policy, for example, can provide. So I'm not going to make a formal presentation, but I just want to share also some of the lessons I learned from working with international organization, but also getting involved in the design of many domestic policies. So the first one is the process of designing what we call the national strategy for preventing violent extremism. And as you know, I'm involved as an expert because I used to work for the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute as a researcher, and so CIPRI is one of the it's kind of a prominent think tank when it's come to security matters. So when I came back and after working for the institution for almost 2 years, and I was kind of co-opted by the military here in Senegal, in particular SHEDS, which is the Center for Defense and Security Studies, to help design this national strategy. So, and one of the main issues we faced is approaching the issue of violent extremism in a context where all the region is affected by insecurity. But I think Senegal enjoyed a comparative advantage because the country has never experienced any military coup, and I think it's one of the most stable countries in sub-Saharan Africa that enjoy also a kind of some kind of state institutions capable of handling all kind of shocks, domestic but also international shocks. So when it comes to security, and I think we have a standing military which is known for its professionalism. But I think there is also another dimension that many people don't emphasize on enough. It's the role of domestic but also informal institutions, because when we talk about policy, we tend to focus on formal institutions. But I think there is a very important role that informal institutions play. So when I talk about informal institution, I'm kind of thinking about religious institutions, but also other actors, not necessarily state actors or civil servant. And I think tensions and negotiations always happen between these two actors, formal actors, but also informal actors. So if I take, for example, the issue of violent extremism, which also involve other types of policies, we can see the kind of discrepancies that emerge when you put together all these actors, because the area of violent extremism is not necessarily linked to the capacity of the state, but also the military institution to provide security. It also involves a dialogue between the military, but also the political institution and the society as a whole. So when designing this policy, one of the main challenges we face is how to accommodate the needs of some actors, like religious actors, civil society organizations, but also communities, which are very kind of the first beneficiary of these policies. And of course, during our conversation, and I think there is many issues that people brought up in terms of factors that sometimes weaken the capacity of policymakers to provide sound policies, and oftentimes those policies are not really grounded, are not embedded in the social fabric or in the political fabric. We tend to sometimes apply policies that have been provided elsewhere. Either they are imposed, or sometimes the way we appropriate them in the local context can be very problematic. And this is particularly the case with these policies regarding violent extremism, because most of the people who are pushing this agenda forward are foreign partners who have a stake in making sure that the country is stable because they invested a lot, but also they provide many fundings to Senegal. So making sure that the country is safe from this kind of threat that is coming from other West African countries, including Mali in particular. So in the process, so we involve foreign actors, of course, but the military plays a very central role. And the dialogue between the military and the civilian allows us to understand that security is something that is, is a common construction, and that creating a ground that allows people to have the same understanding of what security means, but also whose security is at stake is something very important when designing those policies. So this is just an example, but I think we can also talk about other experiences in other areas. For example, when Fode was talking about this kind of international agreements, I'm attempted to jump in and also kind of talk a little bit about the importance of these kind of informal institutions like religion when it comes to shaping even foreign policy, right? In Senegal, we tend to think about foreign policy in reference to one of the, mental kind of thinking of Leopold Sédar Senghor, who considers Senegalese foreign policy as in relationship to 4 circles, right? The first circle is with our immediate neighbors, like Mauritania, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, and the Gambia. But also we have a second circle, which include other African countries. But also the third circle is with the Arab and the Muslim world. And then you have another circle, which is our relationship with Western countries. So, but let me just focus a little bit on this kind of third circle, our relationship with the Arab world. And then I will stop there because I don't want to take too much time. One of the interesting things is that this circle, of course, have played a very important role when it comes to positioning Senegal as a soft power, because Senegal is known to be a Muslim majority country. And Senegal has constantly promoted its moderate brand of Islam when attempting to use this kind of cultural capital to attract economic assistance through policy. And this has generated some kind of potential for Senegal cultural penetration by, to penetrate the Arab world, but also building strong relationship with Morocco, which is now one of the main partners. And this has started during, even after independence, when Senghor understood that maybe the Arab language can be an opportunity to open Senegal to the rest of the Arab world. And Senegal played a very important role when in the establishment of the Organization of the Islamic, the OCI, how I can't say the acronym in English, which is the kind of this kind of organization that brings together many Arab countries. And we can see how this evolved over time, and even WAD also played this card by creating some kind of proximity with the Arab world, Qatari, but also Saudi Arabia, but also Morocco, to draw more economic benefits. But I think there is also another important dimension. So how Senegalese Islam, kind of peaceful Islam, has been rebranded or branded in a context of violent extremism. And this also helps Senegal play a very important role, but also kind of drawing from this kind of the charisma of these religious leaders, not only to advance Senegal's foreign policy in the Arab world, but also creating ties with other countries like Morocco, which has also attempted to provide, at least to promote some kind of peaceful Islam by using the Tariqa, the Tijaniya, as a kind of way. The Tijaniya, we see kind of a Sufi brotherhood to strengthen the relationship between Senegal and the other countries. But also, we've seen over the last few years also a kind of move by the state to basically support our Sufi Brotherhood in producing a counter narrative regarding the violent discourse that started emerging in the Senegalese political but also social landscape. So these are kind of a few comments that I wanted to make, but also try to tie them to your different interventions. But of course, I totally concur with you that it's a very important topic that can be approached from different perspectives. And so this is what I wanted to add to this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bodian. I guess now we have 20 minutes. Are there any questions? Now is the time.
Hi, Alion. Let me. Can I just add a little bit more detail to one more thing I wanted to say?
Definitely.
While we wait for questions. So I want to go back to the overall title of my presentation here today: why Sierra Leone's international agreements should matter to us all. I also want to tie that in with Conrad's an aspect of Conrad's in the presentation about the environment. So there are some international agreements that are on the table right now that need to be some international agreements relating to the environment beyond the COP26, COP27 climate conference agreement. There are some additional smaller, less popular, but equally important agreements regarding the environment that are in the pipeline. So again, referring back to my title, why Sierra Leone's international agreement should matter to us all. Last year, actually, last year in New York, about 160 countries came to New York. The goal was to renegotiate and re-ratify the law of the sea, something related to the law of the sea. And this was the second time they were trying to meet to get that done. And that agreement was not signed. They were unsuccessful. They basically agreed to disagree and then agreed to postpone to another date. And we all know the things such as the environmental change is accelerating, climate change is accelerating, those things can't wait, really. We need to do, it's imperative for the world, collectively to do something. So with regard to Sierra Leone, another aspect of my research that I was finding out is why, for example, are some agreements still not signed? Why are they on the table? And then I found, some of the things that I found related to that. So the United States built the international system largely, right, that we know of, the current international system following World War II. So the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions, and so forth, and the United Nations were all negotiated and discussed here. So you can say for a large, to a large extent, the United States can take credit for the architecture of the current international system that we are under. At the same time, also, what has happened in recent years, and this is an interesting development, is that key aspects of that architecture are being chipped at the corners, at the ends, by, for lack of a better way of putting it, by activist young people from the United States, from Europe, and so forth. Some of you, some of my colleagues in Senegal, for example, will be aware of this. When I describe it to you, in Sierra Leone, it's a common phenomenon. You see lots of young people from universities over here. They go, they work with civil society groups on the ground to educate people about their rights, about various, things such as, fair trade instead of free trade, and so forth. They teach people how to advocate, and people have learned how to advocate for their rights. And most of these international agreements that are usually tabled tend to put an inordinate burden on poorer countries such as Sierra Leone and others. But when you have young people, they've educated people about their rights, they're not standing up to some of these international agreements. So they question the process, like the various environmental agreements that will require some caps on things that are done in our country, like farming methods and so forth. They question that, they raise questions about that, and they put pressure on the government not to sign. So it's an interesting development that young people from the West are over in these countries, educating people, teaching them about advocacy, and they're putting that to good use, or to some kind of use when it comes to these international agreements. So that's kind of, my little detail I wanted to add to that. Thank you again, Ali.
Well, I just wonder, how can your young activists also be thinking about how to make the systems? I mean, it's the same kind of idea, speaking up for the legal agreements and making sure they're enforced. In the past, maybe legal agreements were agreed to, no one even paid any attention from an enforcement perspective. But now they're saying, well, hey, we need to enforce these rules, and now we don't really want the rules, so we're going to stop them. Okay, so that same activism, though, can deal with a lot of different things. So I'm kind of encouraged by activists saying, well, hey, let's think through what we're actually agreeing to, because we'll probably actually have to do it,
I agree very much so. It could be put to a much more different and much positive use. I agree.
Yeah, this Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Well, it's kind of interesting, this issue of activism and how it is kind of reshaping activism. Activists are reshaping to some extent domestic policies, but also foreign policies, and pushing the state sometimes to make decisions in line with what people domestically wants. And we can see this trend across sub-Saharan Africa, people trying to rise up to strengthen good governance, but also kind of challenging some kind of foreign agreements. And this is, I don't know what the explanation. Maybe it's part in Senegal. I know that it's partly related to the weakness of unions, but also other actors, traditional actors who used to be, the gatekeepers of all these agreements. Yanamar in Senegal, for example, or not Yanamar, let's say France Dégage, these kind of movements. But it seems to me that there is a kind of post-colonial kind of move to free, quote unquote, because that's the jargon that people use, to free our countries from the ties that bound them with, former colonial powers. And it's kind of interesting to see how people are becoming more and more aware of their capacity to shape domestic policies, but also foreign policies, using pressure as a tool to force policy makers to be more aware of the need of the people. I don't know if in Sierra Leone or in Ghana, this kind of trend is perceptible.
Well, the broad agenda is typically labeled as empowering local people to resist neoliberalism and to resist the neoliberal agenda. That's kind of the rate, the broad rate that it's all subsumed under. And empowering people, again, involves educating them about their rights, about the various implications of international policy, teaching them how to advocate, how to approach lawmakers and decision makers and so forth. And it's working. In some cases, it's working.
Well, I think is a very positive development in terms of just the growth of civil society. I don't think, changes to all the major problems in our world don't take place without activists, whether you're dealing with even colonialism or slavery or any of the bigger changes in our world. The changes took place because people became active and fought for what they thought was an improved outcome. So I think it's very positive in my mind.
Yes, I think that like the example of Senegal, Dr. Mamadou Bodian, said it eloquently. In Senegal, we have, beyond the Yanamar, because we first started, when President Abdoulaye Wade was in term. And then after, we have different movements like the FRAP, talking about FRAP France Dégage. But people, for the time being here in Senegal, we don't have yet an organization complaining about, Chinese presence here in Senegal. Although Chinese presence is, is more connected to what we can call the softer power Mamadou Bodian, mentioned a while ago, because they don't bring weapons here. They don't care about, democracy in Senegal. They don't care about, whether you are killing your people. It's not like the Bretton Woods institution, where they're more concerned about democracy, good governance, the way you're treating your people. But for Chinese, they don't care. What they only care about is how they can have access to your resources. And now we do have, some pushback, but, from an intellectual level, we have some scholars, conducting research, regarding the Chinese, and kind of very vocal against, the way they cooperating with Africa. So yeah, and I think it's worse. We always talk about neocolonialism, in regard to the West, but people don't pay attention much, to what is happening with Chinese for the time being. And it has also a direct link, because when it comes to, for example, international biddings, you instead of favoring your local companies, you're giving the bidding, the tenders to Chinese, because what is happening is they would tell you, okay, we have, we can give you some loans, we have money for you, and they don't, and although the rate is lower compared to the Bretton Woods institution, but you might be ended up having what we call the debt trap at some point, because they're giving you a lot of loans. At some point, you're not able to pay back, and that's what's happening with some East African countries. I think it is Uganda and Tanzania, something like that, where they are now controlling the seaports over there, for 10 years or sometime for 5 years, because they want to get back their money. So yeah, Chinese soft power, is very detrimental. And it has also directly with immigration, because local people, they no longer have access, to good fish, because they have, like, the boats, taking all of the fishes, taking back them home, because and now local livelihood is facing, difficult conditions. So that way, fishermen, ended up being interesting, or getting involved in, having their boat fortunes, to illegal immigration. So that's how, it's kind of interlaced, and it's very complicated for the time being. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you very much to all of you for this very rich feedback / discussion, session. So we have 7 minutes left, just in case if there are any questions from the rest of the audience or not.
Well, I have a question to Conrad. You talk about how, I don't know which percentage of Ghanaian people rely on bribe. So my question is how they define bribe. Is it because there is some scholars from Niger, Jean-Pierre Olivier de Sardin and Georges Blindo, who did a very interesting study on la corruption au quotidien, corruption, everyday corruption in Africa. And they mentioned that sometimes people rely on corruption, not because they want to do so, but it's because it's kind of a very pragmatic way of getting things done. And this become, at the end, part of their everyday culture, right? I don't know if because in Ghana, we hear a lot of stories about how institutions are very strong compared to many West African countries. And the question that I'm asking is whether this is something people are making up, or it seems to me that it doesn't really correspond to the reality on the ground.
Well, I think that's actually one of the points that people can say something, and I thought it was really, I mean, first of all, I found Ghanaians love to tell me exactly what they wanted to hear versus what was actually happening, and I found that interesting from a all levels, but a little frustrating too. But you're looking at the practice of, like, say, giving a bribe when a police officer stops you. If you went back, say, 80 years, that wouldn't be that uncommon in the United States. Many areas, jurisdictions, the mafia controlled certain sectors of the U.S. And so criminal syndicates did that in the United States. So, having, corrupt police officers or them collecting small money and bribes, something that happens and has happened. And yeah, you're right. People pay bribes. And sometimes if you're in a situation, you can pay a small bribe and you can solve a problem. It's kind of handy, for people with the resources. But the problem though is that, so there's a multi-tier thing. Is the practice of paying small bribes to police officers, the correct thing to do? I mean, that's another question, because they didn't ask me for bribes. They asked my driver or other people for bribes. I don't know exactly why I didn't drive, of course. Maybe that was it. But but your second point, you go into it, like here in the United States, if I was going to do a study in a small community, I wouldn't give a token of appreciation to the mayor. I wouldn't pay them, a couple $100. But in Africa, that's commonplace. And I don't view that as bribery. That's just simply a token of appreciation. And that's even written in some of the grants I've written. Okay. So, what's culturally appropriate in a certain circumstance is obviously relevant. Depending on the context, okay, of what's happening, being the best of an area where a lot of countries are doing. I would think it'd be safer to be stopped by a police officer. Well, I don't know. It's just an interesting question you raised there, and that's really something to struggle. You think through what's the right way to do things. At some point, we said we don't want the mafia running places, and we broke up the mafia in the United States. That took a lot of effort and time. At some point, people in Ghana or wherever, they say, well, we don't want our police collecting bribes like that. Well, that's how it ends. The people decide we don't want this anymore, and that's a process. You know what I'm saying? But it's not something that's really imposed externally. It's something that I think people in Ghana would decide what they want or not want. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Just FYI, I've attached a presentation of Dr. Leford for anyone who's interested in his work. And I think, yeah, come here, no problem, welcome. We are 2 minutes from, 1 minute away from the time where the seminar is supposed to end. So I guess just very quickly, I would like to say thank you for everyone who showed up, and especially to our guest speakers today, Dr. Deliverance, come here, and Dr. Bodian, of course, and also Dr. Leford and Fode, Dr. Bhatti. Thank you very much for having taken the time to be here. We know that your schedule is probably very busy, and especially on a Friday, it's not always obvious to be here. So thank you very much. As for me, I would like to let you know that we are currently working on our, we're going to be working on the next seminar soon. which will be on democracy and human rights. So we'll be sending more information regarding that very shortly. So please stay put and have yourself a very nice weekend. Dr. Boudian, maybe you want to say a few words, or anybody else wants to say a few words before?
Yes, thank you so much, Aliu, and thank you so much, colleagues, because that's how I will put it, for attending this seminar, and I think it's very, very, very enlightening. And I'm kind of very interested in the way you approach this foreign policy through agreements. I've been working on foreign policy, and we published a book a couple of years ago on African foreign policy in international institutions. And I talked, a colleague from Harvard, and I published a chapter on Senegalese foreign policy, kind of using this kind of idea of Senegal as a soft power. I would like to follow up and it's kind of conversation and see if there is any possibility for collaboration. Zale, Zale, thank you so much, and Conrad, I really appreciate your availability, and thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to help out, and just good to visit with everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.